Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special Research Tuesdays event devoted to the 3-minute thesis finals. My name is Jessica Borges. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide from the Faculty of Engineering, Computer and Mathematical Sciences, and your host for tonight. I would like to start by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Kaurna people, the original custodians of the Adelaide Plains and the lands on which the University of Adelaide's campuses at North Terrace, Waithe and Roseworthy are built. 3-minute thesis is a national competition which sees PhD students compress years of research into just 3 minutes. The concept was originally developed by the University of Queensland back in 2008, and since then it has been adopted over 600 universities across more than 59 countries. It has become an important event in the Research Tuesday series, as this is a fantastic opportunity to showcase the great work of our early career researchers. The ability of communicate research impact is a skill that all quality researchers must develop. This event provides the perfect space for PhD students to hone these skills and learn how to share their research with the general community. And for us, an audience, it is a great chance to hear some of the future research stars. Dozens of research students in each faculty have been vying for a place at these finals. And tonight, we will hear from 10 of the best. This year, however, we have had to adapt with the changing environment that has seen physical events transition to an online format. This has meant all 3MT hits and faculty finals have been conducted using video submissions rather than in person, like previous years. Now, although a little different this year, I know exactly how all the finalists are feeling right now, as I took part in this competition last year. I took all 3 categories at the university final in 2019, and I also won the Asia Pacific final in Queensland. So no pressure tonight, finalists. You only need to bring that trophy back home. Since I won these competitions last year, I have been fortunate enough to meet and interact with wonderful people. I have increased my confidence in my skills and in my research. I have enjoyed every lesson, every piece of feedback, and every minute of it. It took me here to be in front of you all tonight. Winning last year's competition became one of the most special moments during my PhD so far. All the effort thinking about ways to explain your research in simple words and the hours of practice to get that speech to be perfect pay off. For you, tonight is a celebration of that huge challenge you decided to take on top of all the tasks that we have as PhD candidates. So let me give you all some advice. Even though your presentations have already been submitted, it is important to reflect on some of the key lessons you have learned so far. Being able to explain your research in new ways is always a challenge, but those skills will be invaluable for you moving forward. Don't forget to take every moment of it right now and appreciate it, because what you have accomplished so far is really good for your research career. And to the winner, I wish you all the best in the next stage. Tonight's winner will represent the University of Adelaide at the virtual Asia Pacific Finals, which will be held earlier next month, also via video submission. But before we begin, I would like to invite Professor Michael Lieveld, our Vice Chancellor of Research Operations and Dean of Graduate Studies, to say a few words.
Thank you, Jess. The Research Tuesdays series of presentations is an important mechanism by which the university communicates its research endeavours and impacts to the society that supports us. Normally, of course, you would come along to one of these presentations to hear an in-depth discourse on a topic of interest, typically presented by our most accomplished researchers. Although tonight's final looks a little different from previous years, we at the University of Adelaide are excited to present to you this year's group of emerging researchers who have submitted their presentations via video format. Even in today's radically different environment, these researchers continue to make a huge contribution to the university's research programs. The 3-minute thesis format will give us all the opportunity to learn about 10 different research projects spanning a range of disciplines and presented in a way that has been carefully planned to be accessible to all of us. So why is the 3-minute thesis format proven to be so popular and successful? Firstly, I think it's because it's highly effective in communicating the important and impactful research being undertaken by our research students. As Dean of Graduate Studies, I'm in the fortunate position of seeing a cross-section of the work that PhD and research master's students undertake, which of course covers a very broad set of disciplines in a comprehensive university such as ours. It's quite a challenge to understand some of the research being undertaken, but equally it's inspiring to see the quality and impact of some of the work being done by our research students. In a research-intensive university like ours, HDR students make a huge contribution to the university's research programs. While tonight's presentations are only exposing a small subset of that activity, it nevertheless does a great credit to the body of work being undertaken by all of our research students. The second reason why 3MT competition is so successful and important is because of the increasing importance of concise communication. Virtual communication has changed how we search for and consume news. We live in a time when people are overloaded with information and are becoming used to learning about things in ever more compressed and time-efficient formats. The ability to communicate a complex message accurately, efficiently, and in a format that holds attention is becoming a critical skill for successful professionals. There is also increasing skepticism about information that comes from traditionally trusted sources, and we must be able to communicate complex and sometimes highly nuanced messages concisely. But at the same time, the research that we are undertaking and the methods that we're employing are becoming more complex as we address more difficult research questions using increasingly sophisticated methods and technology. So communicating what we do, and why and how we do it, and the potential benefits to a non-specialist audience in a single slide and a 180-second presentation is a significant challenge. Anyone who can master that art has acquired a very valuable skill indeed. Tonight we will hear from 10 research students who have mastered that art. Once again this year the standard of entrance in the competition has been very high, and I'm sure you'll find that all of the presentations entertaining, interesting, and not least of all educational. You'll face a tough decision when you come to vote for the People's Choice Award winner. I hope everyone who has participated in the virtual competition this year has benefited from the experience in a year like no other, and I want to thank everyone who has taken the considerable amount of time needed to prepare presentations. I also want to thank the staff who have handled the changes to organising this competition this year. I congratulate all of the finalists for making it this far and for the high standard of your entries, and I wish you all good luck this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. This is a truly inspiring event. Before we begin, I would like to talk you through the competition rules, the judging criteria, and how the selection of finalists and judging has occurred this year. There are some very simple but very challenging rules that our students must follow in the 3MT competition. A single static PowerPoint slide is permitted. No slide translations, animations, or movement of any descriptions are allowed. The slide is to be presented from the beginning of the oration. No additional electronic media is permitted. No additional props such as costumes, musical instruments, and laboratory equipment are permitted. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes maximum, and competitors exceeding 3 minutes are disqualified. Presentations are to be spoken word, so no poems, raps, or songs. Presentations are to commence from in front of the camera. Presentations are considered to have commenced when a presenter starts their presentation through either movement or speech. And finally, the decision of the adjudicating panel of judges is final. Each presentation will be judged in 2 main categories. These are comprehension and content, and engagement and communication. The comprehension and content category will consider: did the presentation provide an understanding of the background to the research question being addressed and its significance? Did the presentation clearly describe the key results of the research, including conclusions and outcomes? Did the presentation follow a clear and logical sequence? Was the thesis topic, key results, research significance, and outcomes communicated in language appropriate to a non-specialist audience? Did the speaker avoid scientific jargon, explain terminology, and provide adequate background information to illustrate points? And did the presenter spend adequate time on each element of their presentation? Or did they elaborate for too long on one aspect, or was the presentation rushed? Our second category is engagement and communication, which takes into account the following. Did the oration make the audience want to know more? Was the presenter careful not to trivialize or generalize the research? Did the presenter convey enthusiasm for the research? Did the presenter capture and maintain the audience attention? Did the speaker have sufficient eye contact and vocal range, maintain a steady pace, and were positioned clearly on camera? And did the PowerPoint slide enhance the presentation? Was it clear, legible, and concise? This year, our judging panel worked hard prior to the final tonight and have been judging the video submissions for the past week, using the judging criteria previously mentioned, and scoring each presentation completely independent from each other. The decision has now been made, and the winner will receive a $2,000 travel grant to be used for any travel in relation to the research. But we will find out the winner later in the night. So please stick around until the end of the event. Tonight, you will also be given the opportunity to choose a winner with your vote for the People's Choice Award. A live poll will appear after the 10 finalist presentations, and you will be asked to cast your vote. The winner of the People's Choice Award will receive a $1,000 travel grant, so use your vote wisely. But this is not all. We have one more prize tonight. This year, we had an additional set of judges from Adelaide Botanic High's Year 10 English class and STEM program. They were given the opportunity to view all 10 videos prior to the event, discuss as a group, and submit their choice as the winner for the Student's Choice Award. The winner of the Student's Choice Award will receive a $250 voucher. So the stakes are high. A potential prize of $3,250 and representing the university at an international event. That sounds very juicy to me. So now let's get started. I will introduce each finalist and presentation topic. Their video submission will play. Our finalists are joining us virtually tonight, as I will be asking each of them a question submitted by our panel of judges about their research. This process will then repeat until we have seen all 10 finalist presentations. You, our live audience, will then be given the opportunity to vote in a live poll on your screen to decide the People's Choice winner. I will remind you again later when it is time to cast your vote. Finally, we will tally the votes and the winners for all 3 categories, and this will be announced before we conclude tonight's 3MT final. Please welcome our first finalist, Gillian Armstrong, from the Faculty of Engineering, Computer and Mathematical Sciences. Her presentation is called An Epidemiology of City Vacancy. Go for it, Gillian.
Did you know many cities have a problem with office building vacancy in Australia and beyond? This problem existed before COVID-19. Office vacancy is now set to infect even world capitals such as London and Sydney. Empty buildings don't just hit the pockets of landlords though. They have negative impacts on the rest of the city, as vacancy spreads, infecting other spaces close by, reducing urban vitality and adversely affecting our livelihoods. The prognosis for the vacant buildings themselves is also poor, as obsolete buildings age prematurely. They scar the city with decaying eyesores, and they are consigned to an early grave, with unused premature buildings sent to landfill waste. My research is the first known study to visualise vacancy in non-residential buildings. I have developed a new tool called Vacancy Visual Analytic Method, or VVAM for short, to independently quantify vacancy through repurposing data that's routinely collected by local and federal governments. My research uses an approach similar to that used by epidemiologists to control disease outbreaks, but instead of human populations, I examine building populations. I track and trace vacancy and visualise clusters of different types of vacancy. VVAM is the first study to quantify a prevalent but hidden vacancy type called grey space. Grey space is often in a prime location and is leased, but it has become lifeless. VVAM has already been tested on Adelaide's office building population and recently used by SA state government to help protect heritage buildings from decay. VVAM found that Adelaide city vacancy is not distributed as policymakers expected. Vacant space had community spread, as there were few isolated cases, but many small to medium pockets of vacancy within occupied buildings. Data Insights also robustly questioned a dangerous misconception that the conversion of old buildings for new uses was being prevented by onerous red tape. But the red tape we refer to are actually the building codes that ensure fire safety and disability access. Now, the data challenge the need to bleed building codes to treat the spread of vacancy. My research provides this epidemiological approach to understanding vacancy, to unpick the myths, and help best to decide how to tackle the outbreaks of vacancy in our cities.
Thanks, Gillian. That is definitely an epidemic we want to avoid. We need our cities alive and prosper. The question for you is, what are the other types of vacancies you have discovered through your research?
There's lots of different types of vacancy. Often we just look at untenanted vacancy, which is the data for properties that are on the market for lease. But there's all sorts of other types, like structural vacancy, which is vacancy that hasn't cleared the market for such a long time. And my vacancy looks at grey space as well, which is really prevalent, and it's kind of, it's like the hidden vacancy, but it's also the one that really affects the market.
Thanks, Gillian. Up next is Anna Larsen from the Faculty of Arts. Her presentation title is Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Go for it, Anna.
Let me tell you about Sally. Sally is one of roughly 1 million Australians living overseas at a given time. Sally's been living in the UK for 15 years now. She got British citizenship about 8 years ago, but despite becoming a dual passport holder, Sally still knows that she's an Aussie at heart. She still follows the Australian news closely and votes in the Australian elections. She speaks to her Australian friends and family every day, and she streams the AFL whenever her team are playing. However, Sally's also added a new layer to who she is. She now works for the NHS, pays taxes, and votes in the UK. She owns a property in London and has started a family with her English partner there. So who is Sally? Is she the Australian who set off for a new experience 15 years ago, or is she a different, new British Sally? Can she not be a little bit of both? National identity is considered to be one of the main aspects of citizenship, but with more and more people moving around, experiencing changes to their identity, and gaining more than one citizenship, the way that we understand these concepts is changing. My thesis looks at Australians who've moved overseas long-term to see what the relationship is between international migration, citizenship, and national identity. In order to do so, the study also questions what is Australian national identity. I'm using in-depth interviews with Australians currently living in two prominent global hubs. Through these interviews, I'm exploring how their ties to their home country might change, and whether they can balance multiple identities and be active citizens in more than one place. There's a sentiment that by leaving Australia longer term, whether it be for work or other personal reasons, you're jumping ship and you're abandoning your wonderful home country. This is evident now more than ever, with Australians overseas facing blame for the fact that they're in a different country during a time of global crisis, particularly if they need help. But they are still Australians, and people like Sally often feel Australians right to their core, even if their experiences might have changed them a little bit. I'm empirically exploring the way that Australian expats engage with their home country while overseas. Through this, we can add to our understanding of identity and citizenship, both in theory and in practice, in this world of global migration. The idea that by asking the question, where are you from, you can fit somebody into a single category based on their passport or where they were born is changing. So, is Sally still an Aussie because she was born here, or has she defected and become British because that's where she lives right now? If she were to come back, does she become Australian again? Using the data from over 40 in-depth interviews with Australians currently living overseas, my thesis argues that it really isn't that black and white. She can be both, and our theoretical understanding of citizenship and identity needs to adapt to that changing global reality.
Thanks, Anna. It is definitely not black and white. I am Colombian and becoming more Aussie each day, so I understand the core of your research. The judge's question for you is, what were some of the common themes that came up in your research interviews? Are there any key misconceptions about how we identify with our Australian national identity?
I wouldn't say there's key misconceptions, but there's some really interesting themes that came up that I at least wasn't prepared for. So one of the strongest themes was actually a connection to the land. And a large number of my participants spoke about the connection to nature and the land, because they're living in like really large cities. They're living in London and in Singapore. And so everyone really just missed the sort of like outdoorsy nature of being an Australian. And they felt that that was slipping away from them because they didn't have the opportunity to connect to the land that like they have in Australia, which was a really interesting one.
Thanks, Anna. Finalist number 3 is Emma Aspin from the Faculty of Sciences. Her presentation title is The Goldilocks Grub. Good luck, Emma.
Take a look at this picture in front of you. What do you see? On the top, we have a parasitoid wasp, but don't worry, she's so tiny she would never be able to sting us. But in order for her to reproduce, she needs to find a suitable vessel or host for her to lay her eggs onto. And at the bottom, we have a caterpillar, and he is in for a nasty surprise. You see, our wasp is busy deciding whether this caterpillar would make a good host for her eggs, and she decides this by using a variety of factors. However, there's one thing she values above all the rest, and that's caterpillar size. If the host is too small, it can't support as many eggs on its body. Think of it as like sharing a pizza slice between 4 kids. That's not enough food, and someone's bound to go hungry. But if the host is too big, there's a risk that our wasp mother will be in danger. That's because bigger caterpillars have huge jaws that are able to take a wasp head clean off, and some can even spit vomit on their attackers to try and scare them away. My research has actually found the sweet spot. I gave this wasp caterpillars of all different sizes, so now I know what size a caterpillar has to be for our wasp to lay the maximum number of eggs that she can. But why is this knowledge interesting and useful to us? Well, by a very convenient coincidence, this caterpillar is a huge pest. It causes millions of dollars worth of damage to the wine industry every year. Nowadays, it's getting harder to fight these pests, as some are becoming resistant to insecticides. But what if we used beneficial bugs instead? They can work for us all year round, 24/7, and completely free of charge, getting rid of our pests. My beneficial bug is already out there and fully native to Australia. We call the way they control pest populations as biological control, or biocontrol. I'm researching the behaviour of this natural biocontrol, which could help make sure that this caterpillar problem doesn't get out of hand. And the more we know about how the wasp works, the more efficient we can make our biocontrol plans. So, what have we learned about this wasp today? She is helping protect our vines from pests, whilst working hard to secure food for her kids. She is searching for a host that is not too big, but not too small. She is searching for the Goldilocks grub. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Free of charge pesticide that will translate into more and better quality wine? What else can you ask for life? The question for you is, will we ever see an overpopulation of wasps? And how or will this impact the use of insecticides?
Okay, so hopefully we wouldn't ever see an overpopulation of wasps because the abundance of the host, the light brown apple moth that it preys on, is seasonal. So every time winter comes around, because grapevines are like a man-made structure, the leaves fall off the trees and the wasps and caterpillars both have to find alternative homes for them to stay in. And hopefully when it comes to insecticide, we should see a decrease in the use of this because parasitoids are actually really affected by insecticides. So if we wanted to encourage them to be around in our vineyards, we'd want to be using less of those, which is always a great thing because you wouldn't want to end up with too many chemicals in your wine.
Thanks, Emma. Next up is another Emma, Emma Solly from the Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences, with her presentation, microRNA 181C, conducting a devastating tune for diabetic patients. Good luck, Emma.
Hi everyone, I'm here today to tell you guys about this great new show. It's coming to a diabetic tissue near you. It's called Preventing New Blood Vessel Growth. And the orchestra is conducted by the amazing microRNA 181C. So what is the show about? Well, let me give you some more details. Okay, so the story starts off like this. In response to a low oxygen environment, such as that seen following a heart attack or stroke, or in response to injury, the tissue responds by promoting new blood vessel formation in order to re-oxygenate the area and promote healing. In diabetic patients, this doesn't happen very effectively, leading to higher rates of amputations and even death. And due to the complexities of the disease and the involvement of many different pathways, the development of new and effective therapies to treat this remains really challenging. So why does this happen in diabetic patients? Well, we found that a microRNA called miR181C may be involved. So microRNAs can be thought of as tiny conductors that regulate their own orchestra within the body, controlling multiple pathways to promote normal cell function. We found in healthy cells, miR181C levels become rapidly reduced in response to a low oxygen environment. But in diabetes, high amounts of glucose make sure that miR181C remains increased and that it continues to conduct its orchestra, playing the tune, preventing new blood vessel growth. So, because miR181C has so many molecules in its orchestra, what if we could control it? This may offer a new treatment strategy for diabetic patients, as it will allow us to control the multiple pathways involved. We've actually found when we block the action of miR181C, its orchestra then begins to play a different tune, one that promotes new blood vessel formation by increasing the expression of molecules involved in not only vessel growth, but also those involved in cell survival. This new tune improves recovery following a low oxygen event in the limbs of diabetic mice, but also promotes improved wound healing of diabetic wounds, demonstrating that by therapeutically controlling the conductor and blocking miR181C, This may offer a new treatment strategy for diabetic patients, increasing their ability to heal wounds and reducing the need for amputations, maybe even saving somebody's life. Anyway, I don't want to give too much away. I hope you guys enjoy the show. I think you're really going to love the ending.
Thanks, Emma. Healing and saving lives? That sounds like music to my ears. The judge's question for you is, how would you suppress the levels of this particular gene in diabetic patients? What might future treatments look like?
Thank you very much for the question. So in terms of inhibiting these genes in diabetic patients, we would use a microRNA inhibitor to do this, similar to what we've done in cells and in mice. In terms of the clinical translation for this, however, and how this would actually look as a therapy, there's a really cool feature of microRNAs that we hope to utilize. So microRNAs exist not only in cells, but also in bodily fluids such as the blood, for example. And in this sense, they're actually able to circulate around the body and travel to the tissue that they're needed the most. They're transported by a number of different molecules, including exosomes, extracellular vesicles, RNA binding proteins, apoptosis bodies, but also by a molecule called HDL. So this is colloquially known as the good cholesterol, and it has a lot of beneficial effects in heart disease in its own right. But it can actually carry microRNAs around the body and deliver them to the site where they're most needed. So with respect to clinical translation and a therapy, we would actually hope to be able to extract a patient's own HDL, which is actually quite easy to do. Then we can use this as a delivery vehicle for our microRNA inhibitor and infuse this back into the patient. So we hope that this would theoretically be able to overcome some of the current limitations of the single gene targeted therapies that are currently available. So this would help to reduce the patient's building up immunity to this therapy, as they would recognize this as self rather than foreign. The HDL particle itself would protect the inhibitor from being damaged and degraded within the circulation, ultimately increasing its bioavailability and potentially its effectiveness. And given the broad-acting nature of microRNAs themselves and that they target multiple genes simultaneously, this type of therapy could target multiple genes simultaneously and has significant advantages over these current single gene targeted therapies.
Thanks, Emma. Next, we have Kalia Primer. She is our second Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences finalist, with her presentation entitled Hold Your Breath, Helping Our Blood Vessel Builders Survive in Diabetes. Go for it, Kalia.
Every 30 seconds, a limb is amputated because of diabetes. Within 5 years, half of those people will have passed away. Diabetic foot ulcers are wounds which do not heal, and they develop because people with diabetes can't regrow new blood vessels properly. This means that that wound receives no oxygen or nutrients through the bloodstream, and it won't heal. Currently, there are no effective therapies that actively prevent this, so in order for us to address that, we need to know what's going wrong. There exists a special type of cell whose job it is to build the new blood vessels which will help a wound heal. But a wound is a really dangerous environment for these blood vessel builders, mainly because there's such low levels of oxygen in a wound that from these cells' perspective, it might as well be the top of Mount Everest. So what can these blood vessel builders do to trek through that dangerous environment and do their job? They hold their breath. These cells actually hold their breath and reduce their oxygen consumption. But when a person has diabetes and has really high blood sugar, we've shown that these cells lose their ability to survive in this environment and they can't form new blood vessels. So what's going wrong? I've shown that the problem lies with their mitochondria, which are one of the most important pieces of machinery in a cell because they're responsible for producing most of their energy. However, they also use up a lot of oxygen during that process, so shutting down the mitochondria is one of the main ways that a cell can reduce its oxygen consumption. Fortunately, in our blood vessel builders, there's a molecule present whose job it is to do just that. PDK4 becomes active when there's no oxygen around. It kind of wakes up and thinks, hang on, there is no oxygen in this environment at all, runs over to the mitochondria and says, okay, you need to shut down right now because this cell needs to be able to hold its breath. To try and explain what's happening to our blood vessel builders in diabetes, I've shown that when we expose them to high sugar levels, this actually stops PDK4 from being able to tell the mitochondria to shut down. Basically, that high sugar environment stops the cells from being able to hold their breath, so it's no wonder they aren't surviving to build new blood vessels. To try and fix that in people with diabetes, I'm creating a gene therapy which will increase the amounts of PDK4 available to our blood vessel builders as they enter that dangerous wound environment. That extra PDK4 will act as a reminder to the cells to shut down their mitochondria, even if there's heaps of blood sugar around to distract them. Diabetic foot ulcers stop people from being able to walk, to go to work, and in the 3 minutes that I've been speaking, 6 people have had a limb amputated because of them. If my therapy can help remind our cells to shut down their mitochondria in that dangerous wound environment, maybe we can restore new blood vessel growth in these diabetic patients, help their wounds heal, and prevent some amputations.
Thanks, Kalia. It sounds like adding PDK4 might be the answer to conquer that Everest and save lives. The judge's question for you is, can you elaborate on what's involved in gene therapy? Has the gene therapy been tested, or how long might be before we see this therapy used in our hospitals?
Thanks, great question. So to elaborate a little bit more on what a gene therapy is, gene therapy basically involves firstly identifying a gene that's negatively affected by a disease state, and then changing the expression of that gene in a patient to try and solve that problem. There's still quite a long way with this PDK4 gene therapy to go. We still have to test it in our preclinical models, which is something we're developing currently. So we're developing a viral gene therapy, which means we'll use a little virus to carry that gene into the right type of cell, and then we can turn on expression of that gene and turn it off when it's not needed anymore. So we first need to get through all of our animal models and all the preclinical studies before we can think about translating this into human use, but hopefully that's where this ends up.
Thanks, Kalia. We are now into the second half with finalist number 6, Nikki McCarthy, our second representative from the Faculty of Sciences. Her presentation is called 99 Problems. Take it away, Nikki.
Did you know that about 17 million lambs will die this year in Australia? That equates to about 33 per minute, which means by the time I'm finished talking, 99 lambs will have died. Most will die within the first 3 days of life, and twins are more susceptible than singles. As well as costing a bomb, about $440 million in lost production, to be somewhat precise. It's a huge animal welfare concern, and it's pretty miserable for the poor farmer who finds dead lambs in the paddock. Lambs die for many reasons, but the biggest risk factor coming into this world is birth weight. Underweight lambs, those below about 3.5 kilos, often don't have the energy after birth to stand up and suckle, and if they can't do that, they miss out on that first drink of colostrum. Then they can't thermoregulate properly, and ultimately they die of starvation and hypothermia. So, aside from knitting cute little cotton, woolen jackets for our lambs, what can we do to save them? Now, you may know amino acids are the building blocks of life. They make proteins that help the body grow and repair, and are especially important during pregnancy for a growing fetus. Arginine is an amino acid that in the body can be converted into a molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. It helps blood vessels expand and dilate, and in this way, it could deliver more nutrients to a growing fetus. Several studies have shown that giving a pregnant animal an intravenous injection of arginine can increase not only the birth weight, but brown fat a fetus has. Now, brown fat is good fat. It's the stuff that keeps neonates warm when they first enter this world. Heavier birth weights, more brown fat. This is exactly what we want to see in our lambs. So here's where my study comes in. Now, you may have noticed I said intravenous arginine, which, if you're a farmer, isn't all that practical. So my study is looking at if you incorporate arginine to the feed and feed it to an animal rather than injecting it, can it have the same outcomes? And because arginine is somewhat expensive, Can you use a precursor, citrulline, and have that convert into arginine, convert into nitric oxide, convert into heavier birth weights and warmer lambs? My study is exciting not only for farmers, but for animal welfare. If we can improve birth weights and temperatures of lambs, we could potentially save my 99 lambs that would have otherwise died during my talk.
Thanks, Nikki. Those are 99 very cute lambs that are important to save. The question for you is, if the survival rate of lambs can be improved, what are the implications this could have on Australia's meat industry? Could we be facing potentially lower cost of lamb?
I guess if we can improve the survival of lambs, especially twin lambs, it has a big impact on farmers' economic welfare. Considering that we are now exporting lots of lamb and wool to the United States and China especially, it could have a huge economic increase for Australia and be quite positive for the economy.
By this point, you're probably wondering, where are the male finalists? Well, let me tell you that this year, all 10 finalists are women. So now, representing the faculty of the professions, our next finalist is Nikki Dumbrell, with her presentation, Demystifying Social License. Good luck, Nikki.
Across Australia and the globe, we're having debates about whether or where to establish things like mines or install energy infrastructure and where to store nuclear waste. And we've become increasingly aware of the role of public opinion in determining the outcome of these debates. So much so, the term social license was coined as a metaphor for a legal license. The implication? Just as a legal license would need to be obtained to establish a mine, so too should a social license. Communities grant social licenses to businesses they approve of, or businesses that meet their environmental or social expectations. But the term social license is vague and open to many interpretations. And this concerns me because if we can't articulate what a social license is, or the problems we use it to describe, we're hardly going to be in a position to solve them. For example, here we have a social license issue, which is essentially a question about whether we should allocate land and water resources on the Liverpool Plains, New South Wales, to mining or agriculture. By reviewing the 25 years of social license literature to date, I think the overarching issue in debates like this one is economic. That is, the distribution of costs and benefits. So, in my PhD, I'm using welfare economics perspectives to identify what might really be going on in cases like this one. My research shows that across industries and locations, most often communities withhold a social license when they suffer from negative externalities. These are costs experienced by a third party, not the producer or the consumer in a transaction. An example here might be soil or water contamination. And some people may be willing to trade off these costs to access benefits like job opportunities. But if the costs are too great or outweigh the benefits, communities can withhold a social license in an effort to rectify this balance. Does it work? Evidence from case studies as to the effectiveness of withholding a social license to demand better outcomes for affected communities is mixed. Media attention, transparency and consultation, as well as business and institutional arrangements are critical. Research I'm doing now, working closely with stakeholders in the energy and agricultural industries, is testing the idea that if we think of social license issues as responses to economic problems, like negative externalities, then we can focus on addressing the causes rather than the symptoms of social license problems to the benefit of the affected industries and communities.
Thanks, Nikki. I didn't even know what a social license is. So this was incredibly interesting. If we can count community benefits in economic terms, we could certainly make better decisions in the future. The judges' question for you is, are local communities biased in the way they view and issue social license? For example, short-term job creation versus long-term environmental impacts. What are some of the ways we can remove the potential for bias?
That's a good question. Yes, I think different communities all respond differently and have different motivations for accepting or rejecting different developments or industries in their community. There is much evidence of communities making trade-offs between short and long-term gain or short and long-term costs, in particular job opportunities instead of perhaps environmental protection. In thinking long-term, communities essentially, I think the ticket there for them to be aware of the decisions they're making is information, and consultation with communities and asymmetric information arrangements between companies or businesses and communities is probably the ticket to communicating what it is that the community might be giving up, but also who else gets a say in that conversation. If those communities are the only people getting a say, then they're probably going to be biased toward current conditions if they're struggling to get access to those things elsewhere. So, but if other communities or governments, institutions are involved, then that could mediate that bias effect as well and help those communities transition to long-term futures that are beneficial for them as well, not just short-term futures.
Thank you, Nikki. Our second student from the Faculty of Engineering, Computer and Mathematical Sciences is up next. Please welcome Pei Lai Yap with her presentation, Magic Biocarpet for Clean Water. Take it away, Pei.
Imagine washing your hands in water so polluted that it only makes your hands dirtier. We know that hand washing is the best way to prevent the spread of disease, like coronavirus. But how do you clean your hands without a clean water supply? Water is an essential resource, yet our rivers, reservoirs, and oceans are drowning in pollutants that jeopardize our health. Do you know that every minute a newborn dies from infection caused by a lack of clean water? And 1 in 3 people worldwide do not have access to clean and safe drinking water. And can you believe the world's poor pay more for water than the rich? Therefore, we need to secure the future of clean water for everyone. So, how can this be done? Through my research, I have found the solution: a cheap and advanced water purification technology that can provide clean and sustainable drinking water to everyone. I have developed a biodegradable and moldable material that can trap different classes of toxic water pollutants all at once. This advanced material is so light that it floats on water just like Aladdin's magic carpet floats in thin air. Let me share a secret with you. This advanced material is made of brown algae, magnetic nanoparticles, and graphene in a jelly mixture cured by UV light. Graphene comes from peeling thin layers of graphite flakes. You know, the black dust that comes off when you sharpen a pencil. This advanced material can be molded easily into any size or shape. Once saturated in water, it can be magnetically removed, recycled, and reused. This is a fully sustainable solution. Results from my research have already proved that this technology is successful and ready to remove mixed pollutants, oil, dyes, and heavy metals from unsafe water. This has never been achieved before. This technology is critical if we are to save the millions of people that innocently lose their lives simply because they don't have access to clean water.
Thanks, Pei. A sustainable and efficient way to clean water? This could be the invention of the century. The judge's question for you is, what are some of the barriers to implementing technology like this, and how can we go about removing them?
So for this application of advanced material, we can actually apply this in natural waters like contaminated river water or lake water. We can actually use this biocarpet to actually simultaneously trap all these coexisting water pollutants together. So we know that a water system itself is a very complex system. So we have all these pollutants like heavy metals and dyes, organic pollutants that exist together. So with this material, we can actually target to trap these pollutants all together. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pei. Next up is Tamika Gluvzis from the Faculty of Arts with her presentation, Boring History is So Last Century. Take it away, Tamika.
I'd like you to cast your minds back for me and think, when was the last time you read an academic history book? See, we historians are very attached to our history books, and for good reason. Books allow us to engage with an issue in great detail from multiple perspectives and pose sophisticated arguments. In comparison, movies and TV shows tend to be superficial, emotional rather than critical and analytical. We're much more likely to get swept up in the drama of Rhett and Scarlett's romance than think critically about the Civil War. For this reason, historians tend to be dismissive of popular forms of historical media. But when was the last time you read an academic history book? What about your little cousin or younger sibling? In our digital world, we're much more likely to spend time on Netflix or on a phone app than in the dusty aisles of a library. But this leaves us with a big problem. In our age of fake news and political misuse of history, public engagement with the past and critical thinking skills are more important than ever before. But if the type of history that we can learn from movies and TV shows is limited, how do we get people engaged with history? What we need is a medium that is interactive, hyper-detailed, multi-perspective, non-linear, and made up of complex systems much like real life. Well, we actually have one, and believe it or not, it's video games. But wait, you may be thinking, my little brother spent $2,000 on Fortnite skins. Aren't video games just a waste of time? Well, that's where my PhD thesis comes in. I'm exploring the ways in which games can be more than just mindless shoot-'em-up entertainment. Already, video games have increased in sophistication, maturity, and the ability to engage in complex topics. Games are a medium which let us not only be told or shown what happened in the past, but to explore it for ourselves, to engage, to play, experiment, test out theories, replay a scenario until we understand all the contributing factors. It lets us inhabit the past from multiple perspectives, places, and lives. And games are already forcing us to critically reflect on aspects of the past in a way not too dissimilar to that of historians. For example, the Civilization series asks us whether geography, social policies, or economic factors are more important in the growth of nations. This War of Mine asks us what actions we would take to survive in a war-torn city under siege. And Papers, Please shows us just how easy it could be for an ordinary person to become complicit in an authoritarian regime. And this is only scratching the surface of what might be possible with an open mind and some ingenuity. If historians embrace digital interactive media, we could bring history education out of the ivory tower and into the 21st century. After all, what we learn about history is only as good as the medium through which we learn it. And I believe that video games could be the most powerful medium of all.
Thanks, Tamika. 3 minutes ago, I was not a big fan of history of video games. Now I want to do both. Great job. The question for you is, how can we break down the stigmas associated with video games? And would you support the introduction of a new classification of games that labels them as historically accurate?
Thank you for your question. That's great. It's true that there is a lot of social stigma still around video games. Though in my research, I found that among historians, it is beginning to break down and people are beginning to recognize that new technology is not something to be afraid of or to scorn, but it's an opportunity for us. I believe that simply more exposure to the medium and the things that it is capable of will help to break down that stigma. I believe a lot of people currently may look down upon it just out of not being exposed to it and not understanding the possibilities that there may be for a mature, sophisticated, complex form of engagement through video games. In terms of classifying games as historically accurate,
I don't believe that is actually the most important thing. It is possible to teach people great historical thinking skills without necessarily creating a game or a story that is perfectly historically accurate. And there's lots of ways you can do this. For example, you may be able to teach someone a theory of history using a fictional setting, but it is very applicable to real world and theories that people have about the past. I think that designating games for educational purposes can be really useful. And there are definitely movements such as the serious games movement, which are trying to do this and create a distinction between themselves as games for serious purposes and games that are for entertainment. But I don't believe that dichotomy actually needs to be upheld. And games that are used for entertainment, and even games that may not be historically accurate, can actually still be extremely useful for teaching people critical thinking skills.
Thanks, Tamika. Lucky last for the evening is Tajushma Siwak from the Faculty of the Professions. Her presentation poses an interesting question. Does global economic uncertainty matter for trade flows of emerging economies? Take it away, Tajushma.
Imagine a world where the only certain thing is uncertainty itself, and now traders, as in exporters or importers, sitting behind their desk and contemplating on the way forward with their contracts. For my PhD thesis, I dive into that world. In particular, I'm interested in emerging and developing economies. The global economy has long tilted in their favor. Did you even reckon that their share of global output has increased from just 36% in 1990s to about 60% nowadays? Yes, more than half of total global output. I focus on EM7 economies. Rings a bell? Possibly not. It's a fairly new term coined by the World Bank in 2017. The EM7 economies are the 7 richest emerging economies. They are Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey. Think of them as the G7 counterpart for emerging economies. Next, we are all aware that the global economy we are operating in is an increasingly uncertain one. The Brexit vote, Iran's sanctions, trade tensions between US and China, and more recently, lockdown or no lockdown, is one question which must have bugged everybody's mind. Using monthly data for the EM7 economies, I investigate whether global economic uncertainty shock impacts trade flows of emerging economies. My results show that a global economic uncertainty shock does not play a significant role for imports and exports of EM7 economies. In contrast, the same exercise with a global activity shock shows that trade flows risk falling by about 2% should a global activity shock materialize. Finally, amidst all the great speculation fueled by the COVID-19 pandemic, my result shows the crucial need to differentiate between an uncertainty shock and an actual global economic activity decline. Take the Brexit example. The vote was announced in 2015. The referendum was passed in July 2016, and till date, no trade deal has been agreed between UK and the EU. It is fairly hard to imagine that traders in the EM7 economies would have altogether adjusted their contracts just because of the uncertainty prevalent. The more so, uncertainty is just business as usual for super exporters, as in big multinationals who, not a single doubt about it, govern the global trade trends. All in all, uncertainty, more fear than harm.
Thanks, Tajushma. We should definitely take a close look to those emerging economies, as the improvement of quality of life for millions of people depend on it. The judge's question for you is: you identified that global economic shocks do not impact emerging economies in the same way that they do for developed nations. Can you explain some of the key reasons why this might be the case?
Actually, my research is mostly focused on emerging economies and not the advanced economies. But one way, like my focus is more on trade actually. So
the results are just pinpointing one single fact that although global economic uncertainty might not matter for trade, literature has shown that it matters for consumption and investment, and mostly for advanced economies. But like faced with the lack of research in emerging economies, I try to see what's going to happen if the emerging economies face uncertainty, what happens for their trade. And it's like the results just show that for the emerging economies, the trade flows is unaffected. But I've not really looked at the developed nations per se. But yeah, some research has shown, for example, that trade flows in developed nations are affected by uncertainty.
Thank you to our finalists for their video submissions and their ongoing research. It is inspiring to hear from you tackling such important problems, from history to diabetes, from clear water to quality wine. Prior to tonight, the judges have viewed the video submissions and made their final decisions, which I'll be announcing shortly. Before that, though, we want to hear from you. For the People's Choice Award, a live poll will appear on your screens for you to vote for your winner. Remember, like our judges, we want you to base your decision on those two categories: comprehension and content, and engagement and communication. We will give you a few minutes to vote. For those watching on Facebook, please stay tuned for the results. I'll be back with you shortly. I was feeling a bit lonely at the Bragg's lecture theatre, all by myself. So I thought this was probably more appropriate. Thank you all for your votes. We now have our People's Choice winner. Before announcing the category winners, I would like to congratulate all the finalists for an outstanding effort, especially in such unusual and uncertain circumstances. Let's start with the People's Choice Award, voted by you, our live audience. Tonight's winner is Kalia Primer. So congratulations, Kalia. We're gonna invite you to share your screen with us, and maybe you can just say a few words for the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience who, first of all, took the time to come along tonight and watch all of our presentations. And thank you so much for voting for my presentation. It really means a lot, so thank you so much.
Congratulations, Kalia. Let's just go now with the Students' Choice Award as selected by Year 10 students from Adelaide Botanic High School. And in this category, the winner is Kalia Primer. So Kalia, congratulations. Would you like to say a few words for the students?
Thank you. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all the students from the Year 10 classes at Botanic High. Thank you so much for voting for my video. It really means a lot that you guys appreciated it. It really means a lot. I'd also like to say if any of the students ever wanted to get in touch with me to have a chat about what it's like to study science or do a PhD, please don't hesitate to. I'm always happy to answer questions. So thank you so much again.
All right. Congratulations again, Kalia. And finally, I am pleased to announce the 2020 3-Minute Thesis winner, as voted by our panel of judges. And the winner is Kalia Primer. Congratulations. You repeated, again, a triple victory. And would you like to say a few words for our judges and all our audience?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I suppose I'd better just say thank you so much to the organisers for putting this competition together. It's been such a fantastic opportunity, I think, for all of us to be able to present our research in this way. Thank you to everyone who came along to watch, and thank you also to my supervisors for helping me put this presentation together. This has been such an exciting experience, so thank you so much.
Congratulations once again to our winner, but also to all our students that participated in this event tonight. You all did a fantastic job. Your presentations tonight provide a fascinating insight into the work that the University of Adelaide is doing to further our understanding of the world around us, and tonight about diabetes. To our audience, thank you once all again for being a special part of tonight's event. Don't forget, Research Tuesdays resumes as per normal next month, so please check the Research Tuesdays website for more information. Thank you very much and good night.